Hey, welcome back to another episode of Amateur Adventures in Lutherie. This video will be showing a repair on a ukulele that was previously repaired. It's a Leolani ukulele, and actually the very last video I did was of this ukulele putting a new bridge on it, or at least replacing the bridge or resticking the bridge. The bridge had come off. Anyway, I got it repaired nicely. I thought things looked really good. My friend, who is the owner of it, came and picked it up, took it out, put it in his car, got distracted by something, and the next thing I know, he's standing back on the porch with a ukulele in this condition. So he had set it through the window of his car. It's summertime and it's a little warmer. And then he got distracted with something. When he went to go get back in his car, he actually sat right on top of it. And I mean, you can see the damage here. It basically ripped the neck right off. The neck broke at the joint where it was laminated with the heel stock piece. And so it was a fairly clean break. There were a couple of little shards hanging off. But I decided, I've built a ukulele before and I just kind of went out of my head with it. And I started thinking, I'm going to capture all of the measurements of the instruments that I'm working on so I can refer back to them. And maybe when I get to the point where I want to make my own instruments, I'll have a lot of data that I can pull from and try to get, one that maybe is more functional than the one that I built from scratch in the past. It actually looks kind of nice. Cute little ukulele, but honestly sounds horrible. So I went through this one pretty thoroughly, grabbed a bunch of measurements, and then I go about putting it back together. Now, there were some interesting things. They actually put a staple through the top of that into the block that's there to catch the neck. And then on the back of this ukulele, when he sat on it, it actually cracked the back. And that little crack, I end up doing a drop fill on later. And drop fill essentially is just super glue, and you drop it in, and then you sand it and level it off. And so you'll see that. There where that broke off, there was actually a dowel in there, so I'm going to have to do something with the dowel. The corresponding piece of the broken dowel is in the neck of the ukulele that's off on the other side. And then where that heel block kind of tapers in there, there was a little piece that was chunked off. You can also see right there hanging off that one side, there's kind of a spur that broke off from the binding. There was also a little piece of the rosette, the abalone, on the underside of the fretboard, so we'll be taking that off. So here I'm just cutting off that little spur of maple that this ukulele is wrapped in. And I've had my best results when I'm trying to fix wood projects, really breaking them down into their smallest components and sticking the pieces individually, kind of like a puzzle back together, rather than trying to glue it all up at once and try to figure out how to get it to stick together. So I've got that spur, and probably going to show more film than you need to see on this, but I dry fit it just to make sure it's going to work okay. And it actually slotted back in nicely, since, essentially it's just a fractured piece.
It nicely, doesn't
so kind of try a different way or two of putting it in there to see what's going to work best. I did a dry clamp on it to try to see the best way to hold it down, and then we just get to gluing. So glued in pretty heavy, got the piece wedged back in, and it held itself in pretty well, just with the pressure, sliding the fractured piece in behind the piece that was still stuck to the ukulele. And then I went ahead and got some clamps on it anyway, just to make sure it's as tight as it can go. I actually remark right here, well, that fits in pretty nice. And in the end, it actually almost became invisible, which was kind of surprising. I thought at least the fracture would stand out. So got a little bit of a clamp on there, and now I'm looking at that spur that's off the heel block. I was going to try to put some glue underneath it and then stick it down and then stick the neck in, but when I was messing around with it, I fractured it off. So I ended up pulling it free, gluing everything up, and then sticking it back in to the hole it came from as a bit of a wedge. So before I can stick the neck on, I do need to address that broken piece of doweling. So I just started with the small drill bit and tried to sneak up on it until I had drilled it out completely. And I actually was able to borrow a technique that I'd seen in some other videos for making your own dowels. I don't have any dowel stock, and usually when I have time to work on this kind of stuff, like even right now as I'm doing this voiceover, it's about 12:30, in the morning, early in the morning, and so I don't have any dowel laying around. So after I got this drilled out on both sides, I remembered a video I'd seen of people kind of making their own dowel by just using a hunk of metal and essentially forcing wood through the hole in a piece of metal. And so there's my dowel starter. I've actually got in the vise there a little square, and it just so happens that the hole in the square is 3/16, which is the size of the dowel. So I just use a drill, spin it down, apply pressure, and pushed it through that hole. And this is actually my second attempt. The first time I didn't go very straight up and down, so I didn't get a very straight dowel, but you can see there, pretty slick. I was kind of surprised how well it worked. So if you ever have to make a small dowel and you got any kind of a piece of metal with a hole in it, it's approximately the size you need. You just run it together. So I'm going to put way more glue on this than it probably ever needed. But it's pretty easy to wipe it off if you get a little bit of squeeze out. And I have seen instruments fail, including this one actually, the bridge that came off that I showed in the other video. Underneath of it, the glue was not real thoroughly applied, and just under string tension, it actually popped right off. So the dowel that was in there did help to guide that back into a pretty nice alignment. By the time I got this thing clamped up, I was really pretty surprised how clean that heel part went together. There was not a lot of work that had to be done to it just to level it out. So clean up a little bit of the squeeze out here and applying more and more clamps to try to lock everything down. And so now what I'm using to hold the neck to the body in terms of force towards the tailstock is really just the piece that hangs out over the body, that extension of fretboard that goes out over the body, and I stuck it down, applied a bunch of pressure, and then clamped it in. So here it is out of the clamps with the glue dry, and using your thumb you can really feel how smooth it is. There's that hole in the back, and that's one that we'll be working on here with the drop fill. But I was shocked how well that heel stock came out. So just to clean it up a little bit, I just wrapped a piece of sandpaper around a round object. That's my glue applicator brush, and I just worked over that heel really slowly, and then I worked my way up through different grits of sandpaper to smooth it out. And yeah, it does cut through the finish on this, but I have a lacquer spray that is just a Minwax product that I found does a pretty good job matching most of these ukulele finishes. I don't know if they're using some type of a UV cure finish or if they just spray a lacquer that's easy to apply. There was that little spot with the overhang kind of chipped out, and it glued up pretty nice, but I just filled it with a little bit of super glue. And then when it got tacky, I sanded on it a little bit, and it essentially creates its own little fill, and it smoothed that area out really nice. And once the spray went on it, it was pretty invisible. I mean, it's there if you know what to look for, but worked really well. Here I was going to try to push that out a little bit and see if I could get those to line up, but I never could. So I just went with the super glue. Now I'm using just off the shelf super glues, and what I found is they dried way slower than I wish they would. I had to let that sit basically overnight before I could come back and start sanding on it again. And so we try to essentially just build up the super glue and then level it down, build it up and level it down. Now I'm using a flat, just sandpaper wrapped around a little piece of wood to try to flatten that out. And yeah, you can see I'm cutting into the finish, but that blends back in really nicely. Again, just using a spray-on lacquer. So here I tried a different super glue that I hoped would dry faster. In the end, I actually end up going to the craft store and buying super glues that have a spray catalyst. So you can do the drop fill and then you hit it with a spray catalyst and essentially it flashes off and dries almost immediately. I will show that one on the back again, but here's one of the chips that was in the top, and I'm going to do the same thing up there. I actually did, at this point, have the faster drying catalyzed super glues, and that ended up just saving me a lot of time. I didn't have to wait so long in between. Where that chip came off the binding, I did do a little drop fill over there too. I just used a piece of tape as a dam and dropped some super glue in there, and then end up having to do a lot of sanding. And I'm not going to bore you with lots and lots of sanding on this. I mean, by now you understand the process if you haven't seen it before. So I'm going to get in now and start applying the finish. And again, super simple process where, you know, I'm just masking everything off. And then the nice thing about this lacquer product is it dries to the point where you can sand it and then retouch it very quickly, like easily within, 5 minutes if you're going just with really light coats, which is what I'm doing here. So I would put on a coat, just check and make sure it's kind of cured up, and then I'm using 1000 grit sandpaper, just really lightly, kind of buffing over the top and knocking off any little high points or any specks, and then I just wipe everything down and then hit it with another coat. And this process, rinse and repeat. I did it, probably put maybe 5 coats on it before I was happy and felt like it was uniform. And to blend it in so that it looked all, like it was all done intentionally and all together, I actually did lightly sand the whole top and overspray this lacquer on the whole instrument. And, same to the back of the neck. Just kind of shot up the neck a little ways and then blended it in with some sandpaper and sprayed it a couple times. And then I used kind of a polishing rag at the end that was like a 5000 grit to just kind of knock everything down and to give it a little bit more of a matte finish. I did use a satin lacquer, but it was a little bit shinier than the instrument was originally. And so there's that product, just a Minwax lacquer. But I just used a little piece of 5000 grit, almost like a sponge sandpaper, used for auto body work. I picked it up at AutoZone and gave it a quick buff over the whole instrument. And, overall, I was really happy with the way it turned out. Most of the repairs were pretty much invisible. Definitely the most crucial one, which was the neck being rejoined to the body. I don't think if you hadn't ever seen it off the body, you would ever know that it was off. It came back together really nice. Those drop fills, there were little things that were somewhat visible, but if you're not really looking for them, again, kind of hard to spot. And would you consider this like a new instrument? There's that, see that kind of ghosting shadow on the top there. There's almost a little circle. Boy, that binding where it went back together was pretty much seamless and invisible. I was super happy with the way that turned out. For having a piece chunked off of there, you'd be pretty hard pressed to tell. And then I do show the back there. There's that drop fill. So you can see a little spot there, but what you can't see is a real clear line, and it was perfectly smooth to the touch. And there's a quick look again at the neck. I mean, you can see where that joint is, but that joint was always there. That's, they added that stacked block on there. It's a way to conserve wood. So here it is. It's strung up. Honestly, it came out better than I thought it would. I wasn't really sure whether it would go back together. I mean, really, anything that was made should be able to be remade, but using the original parts. pretty happy with everything. You can see when that neck broke, when it was sat on, it actually broke right at the joint where the two pieces were, you know, laminated together to make that heel stack. And so fairly clean break, went back together really nicely. I did have to do a little bit of a fill right here, but I mean, that joint is just super smooth. And then the overshoot on the finish looks really nice. That break in the back, there's just a little bit of a spot there that you can see, but I mean, it feels perfectly smooth to the touch. The fills that were on the top looking really good. You can see that kind of little white shadowy spot right there where that drop fill is, but it feels nice. And if you're not really moving it in the light, trying to catch it, you know, overall, I'd say it's a win. I mean, it was firewood there for a minute again. So anyway, still sounds like a ukulele. Check back with me again soon. If you like the content, go ahead and subscribe.